Welcome to the Green Wasp Removal YouTube channel. This episode is part 1 of a new long-form series we're starting in the 2023 wasp season about an invasive species of paper wasp called Polistes Dominula, or European Paper Wasp. Polistes Dominula are considered invasive here in upstate Indiana, USA, where they were introduced a few decades ago, but they are considered a very beneficial insect in their native range overseas, in the Mediterranean regions of Europe, North Africa, and Asia. So the term invasive always depends on where you are. The European paper wasp nests that we feature in this series were removed from the property of a local business in early June of 2023, where they had been started by their foundresses inside the frame of a utility trailer. We relocated these nests to our research lab, where we've been documenting their development over time. This series will be broken up into multiple parts, each episode representing a different calendar day whenever we happen to film an update. Check out our other channel content to see another series we're doing on our native Polistes. These are nests that we've been documenting in the 2023 wasp season that remain in the wild where they were discovered. So these two series will complement each other, one about native Polistes paper wasps and the other about invasive Polistes wasps. We hope you enjoy the new European Paper Wasp series. Thanks for watching. If you find our content entertaining and/or educational, please like, subscribe, share, and comment to help us reach a wider audience. Here we'll transition to the beginning of this series on June 3rd of 2023 when these nests were discovered in the wild. Enjoy the show.
At a local business that has some property that has become popular with wasps. This young lady is a Polistes Dominula queen. She's an invasive species, and what she's looking to guard right now is a nest underneath the tailgate of this trailer. So we're going to have to capture her, separate her from the nest, and then collect the nest. This is the foundress. I'll pull her nest out next. And today is June 3rd, I believe, June 3rd, 2023. So let's take a look at the nest. Okay, so here's the nest with a lot of silk-capped pupa inside it. And this would be larva that has become mature enough to weave a silk cap over the top of its cell, inside of which it goes through the full metamorphosis process like a butterfly or many other insects. And so we're going to document that. This is another Polistes Dominula out foraging. It's currently malaxating insect meat. This would indicate that it's got a nest somewhere with larvae, and it is going to feed that larva this insect meat. We're going to capture her because she's an invasive species before she flies away. But it would be nice to track her to see where the nest is. So we'll kind of watch her and see what she does.
One note back on voiceover here for a moment. We later discovered that she was actually trying to get into this fuel panel because she has a nest in there. So we went back on a different day, which you'll see later in the series, and we collected that nest as well. She was trying to fit the large meatball that she had collected in the wild through the crack that she was used to going into in that fuel panel, but she couldn't fit in there because the meatball was so huge, and that's when we captured her.
So let's capture her and see what she has. There she goes. She seems to be orienting right around this space, which means she's taking flights around this particular space. And you see her trying to get into this old fuel panel. we're going to capture her so she can't make a nest as an invasive. Here she is. We just captured her. And so now we have 2 invasive Polistes Dominula foundresses and 1 nest that had already been started. And we'll go from there. So here we have our Polistes queen. So what we're going to do is put her in with our other Polistes Dominula in the habitat we have here. And this habitat has probably 27-ish different Polistes Dominula in it already. They like to hang out up here on the top. But we're going to hope that this new foundress will build a nest underneath this cardboard structure. With all of her new roommates. They're hiding under the bark and everywhere in here. So she'll fly around a bit, get herself acclimated. Now we'll put our other Polistes Dominula into the habitat. This is the one we found on the nest underneath the tailgate of that old trailer. So once she finds her way out of this little temporary container, she'll join the rest of the habitat here. There she goes. All right. So this brings us up to about 29 Polistes Dominula captured so far in spring of 2023. And in general, there seems to be 2 camps of these who have separated into 2 separate colonies. One is up here that usually spends their time above the cardboard. Another's down here, usually spends her time below the bark. And there's another that goes in between the layers of the paper here that's often defending this area in the corner. So, sorry, I can't focus on that right now, but there it is. So there's several that hang out in there and around there, like the ones you see here underneath the various bark pieces. They kind of all have their own little domains that they like to be in.
What we see in this image is the small ball of insect protein, basically a meatball created by the second foundress that we captured in the wild. When we got back to the lab, we wanted to take a closer look at this material to see if we could possibly identify what type of insect she had hunted and began malaxating for her larva. She had already done a very good job of malaxating this piece of meat, and even though we tried to probe it a bit with a toothpick here, it was not possible to figure out exactly what type of insect this was, at least not with the equipment we have. But clearly it was some sort of insect she had hunted and chewed up and was about to feed to whatever larva in whatever nest she had. One of the advantages that this invasive species has, the Polistes Dominula, over our native Polistes wasps, is that their diet is quite varied compared to the rather narrow choice of foods that our native Polistes will hunt. Our natives hunt mostly larval stage insects, which is caterpillars typically, whereas Polistes Dominula, they'll eat a much wider range of insects very readily, and this gives them a significant leg up in the ecosystem. Here we're taking a closer look at the nest. You see some very mature larvae that's about to probably start weaving their silk caps and go into pupation pretty soon. There's also some less mature larvae and some eggs that are relatively new around the most outer rings on this nest. And that's generally how it works. The center has the first generation of workers, and the successive rings around the nest, moving out to the perimeter of the nest, has increasingly newer larvae and then eggs. Once larvae become pupa and they chew their way out of their pupating cell as adults, the cell will be cleared and empty, and the foundress will generally lay fresh eggs right back into those new cells. We also see some stored nectar in some of the cells.
which is the liquid you see attached to the side of the cell wall. This is basically wasp honey. This nest definitely appeared to be a very healthy, active nest in the process of creating the first generation of female workers, which will come out and help expand the nest exponentially throughout the summer months. The most mature larvae you see in this shot are getting very close to the time when they will start weaving their silk caps to begin the pupation process. And they'll end up looking like the ones you see here at the lower part of the frame, where they're covered up with a good strong silk cap, and they'll stay in that state for a couple of weeks while they go through metamorphosis into the adult stage of the wasp, after which they chew their way out of that silk cap and emerge as adult wasps. And we'll try to get you some footage of that when it happens. Otherwise, in this nest, you still see some fresh eggs that have not yet hatched into larvae, and there's always food stored in there as well. You see plenty of nectar in there, and the nectar is for the adult wasps. The larvae only eat the insect meat that's brought to them. The nectar, or the wasp honey, is used only by the adult wasps, who are using it for energy as they forage and hunt and raise their larvae. One of the things we're looking for here is parasite activity, and so far we don't see any in this nest. Now, that doesn't mean that the larva has not been parasitized. It simply means we don't see it yet. Generally, there's at least one form or another of some type of parasite that will be found in these Polistes nests. Whenever we prepare a nest that comes straight from the field to be put into one of our research habitats, we try to give it a very thorough look first, because we don't want to bring in too much in the way of outside organisms into the habitat. But so far, this nest looks relatively clean. As you'll see later in the video, we did ultimately end up finding some book lice, which is a form of bark lice that uses wasp nests as a home and for food. But it wasn't a bad infestation. It was just one or two we'd see here and there. And it's very possible they were in the habitat before this nest came in. We're just not sure. They're so tiny, you could probably fit several of them on a pinhead. Here we're looking at the microscope cam screen, and we're just taking a look at some of the footage that it shows of the head and face of the wasp larva. You can see some of the parts of this larva that will soon become mandibles or antennae or eyes. The larvae look pretty healthy and robust. They don't seem to have any issues. So this nest is cranking right along, creating all sorts of new wasps. Here we see one of the cells with a new egg in it. Hasn't hatched yet into a larva, and some wasp honey attached to the side of the cell. That's nectar that is regurgitated and deposited into the cell by the adult wasp, the foundress who's supporting the nest. Here's a very tiny larva from an egg that is recently hatched. And they're held onto the side of the nest through a substance that keeps them sort of glued there. And there's a bunch of wasp honey here on the left of the frame, also stored in the same cell. Here's another egg. Here's a good look at the developing larva mandibles. You can see the sharp pointed ends there toward the center of the frame, the little black tips on those. Those are the mandibles forming. And the larva is producing fluid all the time, waiting to be fed some protein by the adult wasp. Here we're about to superglue the nest to a piece of cardboard. It'll be moved into one of our research habitats where it will be reintroduced to the queen, or the foundress who began this nest, and we'll hope that she will continue to maintain it
And maybe some of the other wasps inside the habitat already may even step in and help to maintain this nest, or sometimes even take it over and begin laying eggs in it themselves. There are times when other foundresses will come in and attempt to establish dominance on an existing nest, and other times where beta wasps will work for whatever foundress happens to be in charge of the nest, and they will all work together in a eusocial way to support that nest. So it just depends. Sometimes other wasps will attack it and eat the young and lay their own eggs instead. Sometimes they'll support it. So we're mounting the nest here facing upward, and when we install it inside the research habitat where the other Polistes Dominula wasps are already located, it'll be on the bottom of the habitat rather than hanging from the top, which it would in nature. It would hang from the top and the openings on the nest would point downward. But when we're trying to film it in captivity, we just flip it upside down and leave it on the bottom of the habitat.
So we're going to put this nest inside the habitat with about close to 30 different foundresses in the Polistes Dominula species. And what we expect to have happen inside there, based on previous experiments here in the lab environment, is we will see the pupa actually born inside the habitat. The larva, unfortunately, may not survive. This is because there's very limited options for feeding them. We can attempt to put in mealworms or something for the foundresses to feed the larva, but that may or may not happen, in which case the larva will probably end up as food for the nest and maybe for other larvae. But we'll see. At least we can see at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different pupating wasps born in captivity, which will be interesting to watch. So here we're going to introduce the nest to the habitat. Now, the downside of introducing a nest like this to a habitat while it is not heat treated, the nest is not heat treated. Obviously, there's live larvae, eggs, and pupa in there, so we cannot heat treat it. Be prepared for parasite activity in the form of tiny little insects that may live inside this nest and parasitize the occupants of the nest. You might get anything from bark lice or book lice, as it's sometimes known, to parasitic wasps, parasitic flies and larvae, parasitic moths. So just be aware that if you're going to put a nest like this in captivity, you'll need to monitor the nest for that sort of thing. Let's see if we can get this in here without any escapees. Okay. And the reason we put it down on the side rather than hang it up, so we can actually film this nest. By coming over to the side of the habitat, we can film the nest much easier from this angle. So we leave it upside down and allow it to develop in that state, which is not ideal for the larva or the pupa, but it helps us document what will occur in this nest. Here she is. We believe this one's the foundress because she's still out there exploring the nest. With any luck, she'll discover her nest here momentarily.
That's it for the first day of filming of our new series on Polistes Dominula, or European Paper Wasp, relocated into captivity. We'll see you in part 2. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.